Tonight, we're 5 years on from the September quake. So what lessons have been learned and how well has the government responded? New Zealand Prime Minister John Key is my guest and Lynched starts right now. Good evening, thanks for your company tonight. It's hard to believe we're 5 years on from the day that changed the lives of so many people here in Christchurch. It was the September quake that started the sequence of events that included the fatal February quake. So how well has our government responded? Prime Minister John Key was in Christchurch late last week, and I started by asking him if we needed a comprehensive independent review on how well the government handled the response following the quakes.
Well, I think there'll be a series of reviews that have fundamentally taken place. I mean, people do reflect, earthquake, EQC, for instance. I know spend some time looking at, how they've performed, where there's been strengths and weaknesses. The chairman's been looking at that particular issue. I don't know whether they're all joined up, formalised reviews, but I think across the board, people will be looking at it. Local government will look and see whether.
Do you think there should be something independent though, because of the fact that we're in a situation where we live on massive fault lines across the country? If Wellington, God help us, gets hit, do you think we should have something in place to say this is what we can do better next time following the Christchurch disaster?
Yeah, so from the earthquake recovery point of view, or from the civil defence perspective, that review's already happened. So civil defence always do a review after a major issue, and they've certainly done it after Christchurch. So there are those lessons that have been learnt, and they have been factored in. Some of the things you simply can't change. We know the risk factor, for instance, in Wellington is far more significant, for instance, than Auckland, and even actually more significant, arguably, than Christchurch. But it doesn't mean that you move the city or do something. And it doesn't mean that you have the number of people working for EQC that you do if you actually have a disaster. Unfortunately, you do have to have a degree of responding to that when it happens. But look, not everything that happened in Christchurch was perfect. A lot of things, I think, were pretty good when you look at it relative to what you faced. But there are lessons to be learned, and I think we are incorporating those. I
don't want to relitigate what's happened in Christchurch, but is there something that stands out to you, Prime Minister, where you think we could have done that better? And I point to the September quake onwards.
Look, I think the emergency efforts that were undertaken were, for the most part, pretty good. People forget the arguments around allocation of toilets and things like that, but I think for the most part you'd say actually that bit was very, very well done. The beefing up of EQC and the intersection between the private and sector insurers, they're part of a long-term debate now that's actually happening about the role of EQC, what it actually covers, what it doesn't, where those demarcation lines are. That has added some frustration. I still think for the most part the really big calls, the government getting involved, paying, for instance, people, in companies that didn't have that continuity insurance, for instance, buying the red zone and giving people unconditional offers. A lot of those things worked amazingly well. I
want to touch on the red zone later in the program, but let's get to Sarah Regenerate Christchurch, all this at the moment. This Regenerate Christchurch proposal, which is another government agency, some would suggest it's just Sarah dressed up in drag.
Yeah, I think quite different from that, because you've got to remember what the government wants to do is it wants to actually remove itself from the process in Christchurch, not because we're looking to...
But is it doing that though, by still having its mitts in the central city, so to speak?
It is actually, because we're not trying to abdicate our responsibilities. We stand behind the $16.5 billion, all the things that we've done. But in effect, what's happening is the control, well, firstly, Regenerate Christchurch is a joint venture between the council and the government, and control of that's moving over to the council. Because actually, the government doesn't want to be there years down the track, and you don't want us there. Increasingly, as the capacity's there and the opportunities there, Christchurch should actually be the master of its own destiny.
I think people still realise that we still want some of these anchor projects to go ahead. We want, obviously you can't completely pull out, but you say this is a joint project between the council and the government. Are you sincere in saying that though? Because Jerry Brownlee, in my understanding, still has veto powers over the council in the current form of Regenerate Christchurch for over 5 years. How is that possibly democracy in action?
Yeah, only because the government obviously puts in a whole lot of money. Because someone has a veto power doesn't mean it uses a veto power.
But isn't that sort of saying, we're going to pull back, but if you make a mistake, Leanne, Jerry's going to come in.
No, I don't think so, because you've got to remember that there'll be a board of Regenerate Christchurch. In fact, that's the whole purpose of it, is to have some private sector, commercially focused people, for it to be a one-stop shop. You would expect the partners to say, look, if something really went wrong, there would be the right to be able to step in and do something, because we are spending, billions of dollars of taxpayer money. But actually, a lot has changed. Just to give you some perspective, we run cabinet committees. So Leanne Dalziel, as the Mayor of Christchurch, came to our cabinet committee most recently. I caught up with the Mayor last time I was in Christchurch a few days ago. The Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet's now very involved with the council. It's quite different to what it was when Sarah was sort of running the show on behalf of the government.
Okay, in terms of the CCDU, it's sort of a branch within inside Sarah, if you like, the Christchurch Central Development Unit. That'll be staffed, I would imagine, largely by the same people that will be working with Regenerate Christchurch, right? So how
it largely becomes Regenerate Christchurch.
So how does that really make sense? Because many would suggest that the CCDU, for better or worse, has been a bit of a failure at getting things pumping along. Don't get me wrong, I'm not always negative. As you know, I did a video because I was so excited about the progress in the city, and things are happening. Yeah, the Justice Precinct's going well, the bus exchange, it's great. Yeah. However, not all is good though when you look at things like the convention centre. We still don't know where we're at with that. The Metro sports facilities. These are massive projects that potential investors are wanting security over. We still don't have those deadlines. So does that frustrate you, and why don't we have those deadlines in place? Well,
I want everything to happen quickly as well.
So I don't want I'm patient.
I mean, you want them because you live here, and I want it to happen because Christchurch is a very important part of both the commitments I made as Prime Minister, and secondly, it's our second largest city and deserves to be back on its feet.
So with respect, what's the hold up? We'll get this convention centre done.
Yeah, okay. So, but if you look at the Metro Sports Centre, okay, so that is now agreed. We've stepped over the mark and put in an extra 40 million to make sure we do a proper facility there and it's done properly. The only issue with the convention centre, as I understand it, is the sheer cost of it and making sure we get it into something that's both affordable and that can be delivered. So we're getting closer. I can't tell you exactly when will be the point to make the announcement, but we'll make an announcement.
I've got an idea for you. Just reduce the size of it. It's going to be too big. If the monstrosity of it is now, reduce the size and get on with it.
Yeah, I think people are working their way through that, but the challenge is just making sure that when you do that, that it does deliver the things that actually Christchurch wants, because you're building the city for today, but you're also building it for tomorrow, and the convention centre is a very important part of that.
Do you worry in its current form it's a bit too big?
The convention centre? Well, some of the numbers I saw were not affordable. They were a long way over what we had allocated, and I don't think they were realistic. And I think the public themselves would say, why are you spending so much money on this relative even to the Sky City Convention Centre?
So is it fair to say the narrative has changed from that 100-day blueprint, that the announcement that I was at, but now the reality set in at a time where Christchurch needed hope, but now the devil was always in the detail, and now we're starting to realise that perhaps it's just a little bit too dreamlike, if you know what I mean?
Actually, I don't think so. I think if you look at that blueprint, I mean, we were at, most recently, obviously, part of the strip when I was in Christchurch was opening a new hotel that's here. And essentially it was right next to, one of the, I think the East Frame or whatever, so you could see all of that planted, you could see where it was going, it's all going to be developed. I mean, a lot of the frames, for instance, all of that's working. The major anchor projects are actually progressing and progressing well. The only exception really is the convention centre. Now, it's got to get there, and it will get there, but sometimes these things are just more complicated than you think.
Can you hurry up, please?
Well, we're trying to.
I want to talk about, just briefly, when Sarah winds up and will probably become Regenerate Christchurch, let's be honest, will there be a need for the portfolio for Earthquake Recovery Minister, or will that role go?
I think it'll certainly change quite a lot. It's already changed a fair bit because it's now become Sarah's effectively a departmental agency now of Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and that's what's happened is a lot of responsibilities have gone back to their home ministries, if you like. And Jerry is taking a bit of a step back. He's still obviously very actively involved, but over time, I think he wants to transition out of that. Fundamentally, we want council and the city to be totally in control of that. There'll always be a need, I think, for some ministerial involvement because, well, at least for the next while, simply because we're joint venture partners in Regenerate. But I wouldn't underestimate, when you say Regenerate is kind of the old Sarah, we're dumping in our stuff in there and the council putting their things in there, but it is very much a partnership together. quite different than what it was.
Okay. You probably know that the Christchurch City Council has decided to create this other development agency that's supposed to help areas like New Brighton and all this sort of stuff, and also the Central City. You've got the CCDU, you've got the Canterbury Development Corporation, you've got all these agencies. I just wonder whether there's going to be a bit too much duplication around and whether these are all really all needed. It just seems to me you've got this and that and bureaucracy everywhere.
Well, I can't answer for every bit of what the council's got because I'm neither responsible nor intimately aware of every bit of it. Regenerate Christchurch has got a specific mandate over specific parts. But yeah, in the end, actually, the reason we wanted Regenerate Christchurch is we want things to happen. Well, they already are happening. Lots and lots of stuff, as you point out in the video and stuff. But we need a one-stop shop. If you're a developer coming along to wanting to do something, develop part of the frame, build some apartments, whatever it might be, we don't want you having to go to the government effectively, the council effectively. We want it joined up.
It seems like too many. I recall a time where Peter Townsend was highly criticised for saying he could smell the money. Remember that saying? And he was pummeled by the left, in fact everybody really, saying, oh, what a load of rubbish. But he was right though, wasn't he?
Right,
because when I look around the Central City, and I just will deal with that first, there is so much happening. It is changing every day. I live in the Central City. For the first time in a long time, I'm feeling excited. When you look there now, what are you seeing?
Yeah,
you're looking around all the time.
Yeah, so I have in some ways the advantage of coming in and out all the time. So you have a little bit bigger blocks of time, and so you can see that change in a more pronounced way. It's dramatically changing, and essentially you've gone, if you think about it, from a situation where there was a lot of rubble and a lot of talk about how you knock down buildings and ultimately what was going to happen next, to essentially a much more cleared away process, and now the building of new buildings. It's in a very different phase. It doesn't mean everything's been resolved. There's still some disputes and stuff, and there's some building owners that aren't entirely sure what they want to do next.
Oh, well, they should hurry up because we're getting sick of waiting.
Yes,
I just want to briefly touch on the economy, and you'll know this. We've got the BNZ economists coming out and questioning whether we're borrowing our way to a recession, saying the likelihood of New Zealand falling into a recession is increasing every day. Are these doom merchants, or do you believe there's something in that? Because it's not just BNZ now, you've got quite a few other banks echoing that. But you've always said we shouldn't talk ourselves into one.
Yeah,
but is that too simplistic,
well,
though?
actually, the bank economists say the same thing, that we shouldn't talk ourselves into a recession. On the one hand, they come up with some pretty evocative language, is it? But on the other side of the coin, generally when you look at their numbers, they all say the same thing, that we'll come off a growth rate of 3.5% to 2 to 2.5%. So yeah.
So you do accept the economy looks like it's going to slow.
Well, it's slowing a little bit. I think everybody accepts that because of the headwinds of lower dairy prices and China slowing down a bit. On the other side of the coin, there's a hell of a lot happening. I mean, tourism, I'm Minister of Tourism, I can tell you, it's up, the spending alone is up 28% on last year. It's $2.8 billion more being spent. You've got record numbers of tourists coming, you've got record prices for beef, you've got a huge amount of young people being educated in New Zealand, you've got a much lower exchange rate which makes us far more competitive.
So you don't worry that the economy will slow too much, that it will become a crisis point, as some BNZ economists have warned?
Well, firstly, I can't stop what happens internationally. I'm not, I can't control commodity prices, I can't control if China gets a problem. That's the reality. All I can do is deal with those situations. But as the Reserve Bank Governor himself said to me the other day, we have interest rates which are at 3%. In theory, he could have 12 interest rate cuts. I'm not saying he would, but I'm saying he has options that other Reserve banks don't have. We're broadly back in surplus, so we'll very, very soon know the exact number of whether we're there or not, but let's work on the principle for a moment that we are. We're basically one of the few OECD countries, if the only, that's back in surplus. So all I'm saying to you is that yeah, of course there are challenges internationally, but we're better structured and in better shape than other places. And it was the ANZ Bank economists themselves said, on the one hand, while they came out with all this language, they also came out and said, oh, let's not all cry chicken little, because actually the economy's growing all right.
Yes, that conflicting messages there. The housing issue. House prices have eased slightly in Christchurch, which is good, but still I know that house prices are still 6 times the annual income of households in Christchurch, and it's obviously dire in Auckland being 10 times. Why has it taken so long for the government and to sort of realise there's a massive problem here, isn't there?
Well, I don't know if there's a massive problem. There's clearly a problem in Auckland that we're addressing. There was a problem in Christchurch. So different issues. Christchurch was solely a matter of having to build a lot of stock post the earthquake and the red zones and all those sorts of things very quickly. And actually, as you pointed out, we've addressed that actually. So rents have stabilised, maybe even the margins falling a little bit. House prices certainly stabilised. There's a fair bit of stock, and as you said, easing back a wee bit. So Christchurch in a very different shape to Auckland. I will say, interest rates are on a 50-odd year low. We've got KiwiSaver Homestart, for instance, and 90,000 homeowners borrowing or getting money from the government through First Home Buyers Grant.
So almost out of time, but you're confident that the house prices will continue to level off, and I mean we've got a lot of houses, but whether they're affordable is another question.
Yeah, there's always debates about different levels of affordability. All I can tell you is the government's doing what it can. So the conditions you need for people to be able to afford houses are make sure they've got a job and make sure interest rates are low. We're working on both those things.
Just finally, following the presidential elections and
a little bit.
Donald Trump. He is winning. I mean, some would suggest he's a moron. What do you think? Just out of interest?
Well,
he's got an obsession with China, we know that, but what do you reckon?
I saw a little video on China.
Yes, 246 times. What do you reckon?
Well, I don't tend to China that often in my speech, but certainly not 240 times.
What do you make of Donald Trump, just finally?
Well, it's showbiz to a certain degree over there. Whether he, absolutely himself really wants to be president, I don't know. Will he get there again? Who knows? There's a lot of people in the field. It's not unusual to have somebody who makes the front running but actually doesn't ultimately get there.
It's a very diplomatic response, not what I wanted, but never mind.
No, never mind. There you go.
Prime Minister John Key, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Stay with us. We'll have reaction and analysis on that interview with NBR Christchurch journalist Chris Hutching. That's next on the programme. Welcome back to CTV's Lynched programme. So we spoke to Prime Minister John Key. How did he perform in that interview? Joining me right now is NBR Christchurch journalist Chris Hutching. Chris, what did you think of his responses?
Well, it wasn't terribly informative, was it? But when we see these interviews from the Prime Minister, we must remember it's, well, you and I, that is, as media people, it's not the words that are important, it's the presentation and the way he comes across. And he has become very practised at this over nearly 3 terms now. And to give him his due, it does come over fairly naturally for him as being the chairman of the board. So when I looked at that segment before, I wasn't so much listening to what he was saying as his deportment. And it's generally steady as she goes stuff. The ship's okay, and things are ticking along quite nicely, thanks. And don't worry about it.
I noticed he wouldn't answer anything specifically. It was very much in general terms. Was that strategic on his part, do you think?
Partly. I mean, he won't have all of the detail of everything,
sure,
of course, and he admitted that. But he's not really going to weigh into EQC at this point, is he? And I think that leads on to the main question about what kind of independent review you should have for EQC. And we know now in hindsight that there were quite a few errors right at the outset, and expecting them to be the delivery vehicle, for all of the complaints and dealing with customers, was quite mistaken at the outset, because they weren't set up for that. They weren't prepared for it. They were basically a fund manager which had a whole lot of money invested somewhere, but I think their staff was 20, 25 or something like that, wasn't it? And they had to take on hundreds of people. It was over 1,000, I think, within a very short time and get up to speed. And they weren't really capable of that. Whereas, of course, the insurers have got these systems all set up already. They have people on these customer service desks. So I hope that that's a major thing that comes out of this review, if we have one. Now,
of course, the Prime Minister wouldn't say whether there should be some kind of independent review that looks at the entire government response to the earthquakes. But I put it to him, he didn't really answer the question. Shouldn't there be one, given what could easily happen in Wellington? Don't we need to know what we could learn better for next time? Because there will be a next time.
I think that is the main point, and you put it very well. I did agree with him to some degree, that extent, that the immediate emergency aftermath, I think people did a pretty good job. I mean, there was a lot of heroism and all that sort of stuff. But then when we got onto the claims things a few months down the track, that's when things started to come unstuck. And as you say, there will be more disasters like this, hopefully not for a long time, but I'm sure that, there will be. And we need to be better prepared than we were when this came up.
In terms of Earthquake Recovery Minister Jerry Brownlee and his overall approach to the earthquakes and where we see him now in his role, once again, no answers as to whether or what kind of power he will have, very carefully crafted response. In your view, is the role of Earthquake Recovery Minister as such still required in this city today?
Well, less and less, and from my perspective, it seems to me that Jerry Brownlee is trying to fade away a bit, which would
it does
be
seem like that,
quite
doesn't
a task in his case. But he does seem to be trying to take less of the limelight a little bit, except when there is opportunity for photo opportunities to open things that have got generally nothing to do with them, but you know they get asked to open buildings and things. So he does seem to be going back a wee bit, I think, and perhaps this is the opportunity for the council to step up, and hopefully they can show that they've got the mettle to do so.
From your position as a journalist here in Christchurch, have you noticed a lot of photo opportunities where the Prime Minister has come down to open something new, or Jerry Brownlee for that matter, and as you say, there's been little investment from the government's point of view other than look at us, here we are, aren't we wonderful? And as you as a journalist, does that frustrate or concern you?
Look, Chris,
at what message that's conveying?
Just 2 weeks ago, I got another of these interminable invitations to open some factory somewhere, and it was going to be a photo op for either John or Jerry or someone. And I emailed back to the woman that was sending it out and said, I'm happy to talk about your factory and give you some publicity about you opening this factory. Do not send me any photographs of politicians cutting ribbons or anything like that, because I've frankly had a gutsful. And when I see a dear local press newspaper covered often in this sort of stuff, lately we've had, for example, quite a number of features on Dame Baisley, which have been absolute media setups. You would have seen that photograph of her in the press with a whole lot of nice trees and vegetation behind it. Well, that was staged. That was her, one of the local PR people at ECAN loaned her the garden so that she could do that.
And the press bought into it.
And you ask yourself, how did this come about? Did some senior person at the press think she's a good role model for women, she deserves this? Or what? I don't think so. I think probably what happened is what happens all the time to me and you, where you get approached by people wanting a soft touch type of story. And she's scored very well lately. She's had 2 or 3 really good items out of that, hasn't she?
Well, she has. The poster girl for change in Christchurch, for better or worse. And let's talk about some of the delays. When we asked Prime Minister John Key about the delays when it comes to the anchor projects, the sports metro facility, once again, no real answers. Of course, the usual response we get is these are massive projects with a lot of public money, so we do need to be careful. And to a certain degree, I understand that. But do you think he's being sincere in saying that? I mean, this 100-day blueprint, it was the poster boy of the rebuild. The wheels have come off. Yes, the Justice Precincts looks like it could be on time. The bus exchange is finished. But these still aren't the big projects to win over confidence of potential investors.
It'll happen, Chris. I'll tell you, I've got a wee document here, and this is the original blueprint timetable.
I'll hold that up there if you like, the camera.
We won't bore everybody with all of it, but suffice it to say that most of these projects are now about a year to a year and a half too late or overdue. However, you ask yourself, if you were the government and you were delivering these projects, how would you want to do it, why, and what timing is important to you? Now, you, I, and every other media have asked the Prime Minister, Jerry Brownlee, and others, why is this delayed? I've had them directly deny it to my face, and then when you push it a bit further, subsequently, they fudge. Now, it's all about electoral cycles. This rollout of all these great amenities, it's a bit like having a 6-course meal. You don't bring out the 6 courses and dump them all on the table all at once, do you? You have the entree, and everyone goes, ooh, ah, lovely. And then you finish with that, and then you have the next course, and the next course, and the next course.
So you believe that these are almost being delayed, so come election time it looks like the city is hustling and bustling and the residents will go, yay, there's progress because of the national government. You think this is quite political?
Oh, absolutely, Chris. I mean, you probably wouldn't want it, if you were the government, you probably wouldn't want everything to be over and finished for a lot of reasons, partly to do with the hoopla photo op thing, but also because you're looking at GDP figures, you're looking at budget surpluses or deficits, whichever they are. So you're probably better off to try and spread things out as long as you can for all of those purposes, and it just so happens it dovetails very nicely with your electoral cycle in 2017, when you'll be able to say, hey, look at all that activity going on over there. You probably don't want it to be completed and finished, because people might be saying, well, where's the next course?
Do you think the government's worked hard enough, fast enough and smarter enough for those on the east? Because there's that concern we always get on Facebook and on social media, forget the central city, we still feel pretty crap on the east.
Yep, and some of those problems are unsolvable and unresolvable. I keep my ear to the ground with the people who are actually dealing with putting pipes in the ground, and I'm told by a number of them that problems arise time and again when trenches collapse. They can't get the sewage to run right. There's a lot of controversy about what sort of sewage system you want.
Right.
Then we've got this thing where the City Council is trying to red zone the whole lot or pink zone the whole lot through this sea rise controversial thing in the district plan. So really, the lot of people in Christchurch East has been blimmin' tough. And my father lives out there still in Palmer's Road, where I was brought up. I go out there all the time, 2 or 3 times a week, either in my car or biking. It's pretty shocking. You'd think that they could at least fix up a couple of the roads going out there.
Or just let them know what the deal is, because I think communication's the issue. Chris Hutching, thanks for your time tonight. And that is our show. To comment on tonight's program, please do get onto my Facebook page, facebook.com/LynchedInNZ. I'm back on News Talk ZB tomorrow from 8:35, but from all of us here at CTV, good night.